All right. Welcome back. Week 5, management. All right. So first off, what is management? What does it mean to people? I think it's a pretty general definition. We're going to go into a very specific sector of it today. So management specifically for early stage startups and what that means. Uh, I do have an MBA, and this is going to be totally non-MBA content. So just to kind of level set what we're going to go into today. Um, Definitely not going to be this office space sort of TPS reports type of management. This is about the opposite of what I think is going to be useful. And I think the world's changed a lot where even large companies don't really function this way. But if we're all working within the context of startups, this is about the polar opposite perception of traditional management that you're going to hit. Um, so Google or Webster, whatever comes up first on Google, defines management as the process of dealing with or controlling things or people. Decent definition in that it's things or people. I don't know how I feel about that dealing or controlling with. I think it's more around motivating and aligning and getting everyone towards one North Star and around a common goal. But decent enough in that it's things or people related. My assumption is that you're all here because at some point you want to run a crazy startup company that turns into a bunch of people working together towards some kind of common goal. And in my view, the companies of tomorrow are distributed. They are partly full timers. They're partly part timers. You may all have very different definitions for what that looks like in your context and your companies. But my assumption and in the content that we're going to go through today is getting you from just yourself or just a small team to something that'll become larger, greater, and able to take on much bigger challenges than you're able to take on today. So your company or just you at this point probably like something more like this. It's yourself and co-founders or yourself and contractors or some combination of that. So there's a lot less to manage. So we're probably going to get the most out of this session by focusing on kind of this view of it. And I don't want to discount how important management is for even zooming in a little closer than that. If you're a single person company or a couple people company, a company is only as good as the combination of what everyone within it can do. And in its early stage, I really wouldn't discount what that means for you as an individual. Management should absolutely be catered around what a leader, a founder, et cetera, can do. That might sound selfish in the early stages, but if you do the math, it really, really matters. Your productivity, your happiness, your output, your level of comfort with the type of management that's being run in a company is absolutely critical, if not the most critical at the earliest stages, especially if you're the person that's putting in the most time. A quick example of that, something that I see all the time is founders or leaders that aren't able to separate deep work versus shallow work, personally speaking, which I think extends itself into how does that affect the rest of the team? How does that affect future team members, et cetera? So a very simple example of this is if you're planning your week and you've got a task list of 10 items, being able to very quickly separate that into this is shallow work that I can do when I have 15 or 20 minutes or a half hour versus this is something that I'm going to have to dive into for 3 or 4 hours. I think a surprisingly low amount of people actually take the time to split that up and they just kind of do whatever their calendar hits them with. But this is management. It doesn't have to be this suit and ties kind of process thing. Like being able to separate your own work from deep to shallow absolutely is management. Now, kind of context of how we're going to fit in different management theories today. It absolutely matters what the size of the team is. If you're one person versus 10 people, there's completely different management practices to keep in mind. If you're remote, local, or both, the tooling will matter, the process will matter, the best practices will matter. So absolutely matters to isolate and then kind of build the process around where do you fit in those. Full-timers or part-timers. I think it's different to manage people that you expect to be there for years versus people that you expect to be there for months or for hours. And then what specific skill are you working with? So are you working with technical people? Are you working with designers? Are you working with writers? Are you working with others? Each one of those While every individual is different and one engineer is going to function different than other engineers, there will be some similarities in skill types. Like artists tend to have kind of looser management requirements and that they need that creativity and freedom to work within, while a designer might work or a developer might work a little better in stricter confines of here's exactly what the end result is. All right. So we're going to start off with the easy part, and that's going to be the different tools in today's market. And we'll pause to answer any questions here because I want to make sure that we cover tools. And these kind of run the gamut of, at this point, I would consider Slack a project management tool. If you can chat with someone and give someone direction and plug in something in Slack or just use it by its default to get a response back from whoever you're working with, that is management. That's synchronous management, that's asynchronous management. Synchronous being when you're actually meeting with someone over video, asynchronous being when you're actually just chatting with someone and then waiting for a response a day later or 2 days later. There's Asana, which is a more traditional project management tool. It's similar to Trello, but instead of getting a board, you're basically just getting a list. There's a lot of tools like this out here. I would consider those the traditional project management tools. I did put Turtle up here because we built a project management tool, and we specifically built it for the case of startups working with part-time software developers and part-time software developers working with startups. I think it's important kind of if you've got a specific business area that you're working within to use tools and processes that are very vertically integrated. So that's why I threw this up here as an example. I think Stephanie and Banmo are working on something similar in the sense of it's for a very specific market of people working with comedians as marketers and building a project management process and tool around that. And then last kind of category I wanted to point out is Notion, or I guess Airtable would kind of fit similar into this, but it's these all-in-one tools that are coming out that kind of looks like a document, but can kind of become a project management tool. And I think it's these are very powerful tools and what they can be. But as we kind of go from left to right here, they become looser and looser, meaning Notion can be used as like a Google Doc equivalent, or it can be used as a Trello competitor. And I think in that flexibility, it really only becomes as good as the process that you set around it. That said, I don't want to spend a ton of time in these tools because I think the tools matter a lot less than the process. But I do want to pause here and just if anybody does have any specific questions on tools they've used or any of the logos that you see up here, just want to make sure I cover those before we go into process.
I have a really quick question.
Sure.
I'm personally sort of overwhelmed by management tools like this. Like I'm on like a million chat things. I have so many apps for that downloaded on my phone. If my goal is to use as few of those as possible, do you have one to recommend?
I'd say
other than Turtle.
I'd say whatever you're already using most.
Mm-hmm.
Just that's going to be probably your easiest one to not cut.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is going to be that's probably Slack these days. Just everybody's on Slack, and Slack can integrate with other tools. So it kind of becomes like a use one but get many out of it.
Yeah, I think it comes down to just like do whatever everyone else on your team is already on so that you don't have to force them to learn something new.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. That there are so many tools now, so I don't want to say just use one or just use this one specifically because there's a lot of great tools that are coming out. But I don't think you're alone in that you're feeling overwhelmed with how many different tools there are out there. I think everybody's feeling that way. I think markets go through these like bundling and unbundling cycles, and we've been in a very long unbundling cycle, and we're just now, meaning that all these tools are doing very specific and different things. And tools like Notion are, what I like about them is that they're rebundling and putting everything together into one tool. What I'm not sure about is if they can do that well and so quickly. I think that's a very hard job to do. But you're absolutely right. And, try to use fewer tools so that people don't have to learn much. And I think one of the biggest issues in working with new team members is assuming they already know how to use the tool that you know how to use. So using whatever's quickest to learn, whatever's simplest, and whatever you're already using, and specifically whatever's going to be easiest for that new team member to learn, I would veer towards those. That said, I really don't think the tool matters as much as people give it credit for. Like the tools are important, but the process is everything. I would take a great manager with pen and paper, or the lowest fidelity tools, or like Microsoft project from the early 2000s or whatever. I would even take one with Jira or any of those complicated systems over somebody that uses the best tools but might not run a clean process. I think this is critical to let sink in, because it, one, will kind of remove any stress of am I using the right tool, but it all absolutely puts the energy on your focus on the right places of how should I be running my meetings, how should I be communicating with my team members, and what cadence should I be doing that, what should I be focusing on. So I want to bring it back to, if you're managing just yourself, if you're managing just a small team, and eventually wanted to manage this large team, it all starts with, well, what is my process? What am I going to do every week? What am I going to do every month? What am I going to do every quarter to get myself and my team to the right North Star, to the right place? So I pulled actually SpaceX's mission and what they use, because I think this is a great example of management, kind of hidden in plain sight. If you go on SpaceX's website, they mention that their eventual goal is the ultimate goal of enabling people to live on other planets, which I believe, if I remember right from the Elon Musk book, this is like plastered all over the Tesla and SpaceX headquarters. Like there's like a picture of Mars, I think, in both. And I think it's amazing that they found one thing that motivates such a large group of people to get to work every day, to work on the little tasks, the little day-to-day tasks every single day. SpaceX at this point is taking on much larger feats than we are, at least at our starting points. I hope that there are people in this call that eventually do bigger things at SpaceX. Nothing would make me prouder. But I think they're a great example of, they've got 6,000 people, or according to the website right now, that are all focused on one goal, and getting everyone rallied around one North Star is incredibly hard. And how they've done it is they've created this impossible mission, not impossible, but near impossible mission, and they're the only ones really fighting at it, of people living on other planets. And they found that to be incredibly motivating to a collective of 6,000 people, while also focusing them around, why am I working on this specific engine today, or this specific software for this engine, or this specific UI for this engine? Well, it's to get people to live on other planets, which is a pretty impressive goal. So I think to scale that back and to create our versions of living on other planets, there's a pretty simple process to follow that I think any of us can adapt very quickly. It's quarterly, monthly, and weekly planning. And the reason that I don't focus on anything longer than quarterly is because I'm assuming we're all running relatively small startups at this stage. If it was a larger company, you absolutely would do annual planning as well. And maybe for yourself, annual planning matters. But as far as the context of a small business and a small startup, going beyond quarterly is just too far out on the horizon from where you are right now. I just wouldn't kind of muddle your own thoughts with it, or muddle your own team thoughts with it. I would focus on what's ahead for the quarter at most. And I think, in the context, again, of it's a small startup, you're not going to look too much further out. Starting with that quarter is usually the best North Star, and going out from there is just going to be a distraction. So I pulled this. This is pretty old, but this is a real. These have been real tasks that we've worked on internally. So in the quarter, we might lay out, we're going to work on our chat system and our admin system, and inside of that chat system, we're going to put some obvious stuff. We're going to put some non-obvious stuff. We're going to put what we think are the most important kind of 3, 4, 5 items into those categories. And this might not look like a lot, but starting with quarterly, it still lets us think high level and still reduce it down to a manageable enough list. I would recommend meeting on a quarterly basis with at least co-founders. You might not need to involve other team members at that point. It's really just leadership to kind of set that North Star on a quarterly basis. And I really would treat your quarterly in the same way as SpaceX treats getting people to live on other planets. Like for that stage of team, if it's 2, 3 people, or 1, 2, 3 people, I would set that quarterly objective, at least in terms of how you're all collaborating and setting your goals, as the furthest out. That's not to take away from mission. I think mission is totally different. And I want to make sure I'm not confusing anyone with kind of showing SpaceX's mission as a North Star. In that case, they are the same thing. And I absolutely want everyone to have their own kind of long-term missions, but in the sense of management and planning, I just wouldn't go out further than that quarter. What doing robust planning on a quarterly basis gets you, though, is the ability to then scale back and say, okay, this is what we want to achieve on a quarterly basis. What is it exactly that we should do on a monthly basis? And I wouldn't add, I would just highlight, and this kind of helps isolate, okay, what is the most important thing? And I went through there, I just bolded, well, if we're working on chats being viewed offline really don't matter if a user can't send a direct message to another user. And editing roles and creating new projects don't really matter if people can't create new users and change passwords on the admin side. So I went from an 8-item list to a 3-item list for the month. And the nice thing about monthly planning is that a next month is going to come around far before next quarter will come around. So absolutely kind of using that same skateboarding methodology that we've been going through every class, use that information to then reset what that monthly should be, even if it doesn't perfectly match up to the quarter, because when that quarter rolls back around, you'll be able to kind of reset again on a high level basis. If I look back at the few years that we've been running Turtle so far, the messiest quarters have been where we did not run quarterly planning, and the messiest months have been where we did not run monthly planning. So as silly as this sounds, just like setting a calendar invite with yourself, if you're a single founder, with other team members, if you're working with co-founders or advisors, et cetera, and making sure to actually spend the time going through these sessions and writing this out and giving it a couple hours. I mean, this is absolutely a whiteboarding exercise where you want to get it right. It's okay to kind of cross stuff out, delete it, erase it, et cetera. But by the end of that session, you should be feeling pretty good about, yes, these are the most important things for me to get done for the month. And using that same methodology, then you can finally break that down to, okay, what am I going to get done on a weekly basis? So for example, with chat, we might want to just add a message button on a profile and create a first frame of what a direct message even looks like. Before we get the design in there, if we just want press a message button and then open up and you have this chat frame. And same kind of mentality on the admin system, perhaps. So I'm using the term API tool. If you're not familiar with that, there's API tools like Paw. I mean, there's a bunch of other ones, but what they basically do is if you don't have an interface to use your product, you could actually use a tool to interface with your API if you just have a backend set up so far. So that's what we did really early on before we had, I was going into our API tool and creating users and deleting cards and editing cards and doing other stuff that we had to do internally, because it was the first starting point of what our admin system looked like before there was even a UI for the admin system. But I want to make sure that anybody can kind of take the structure of high-level quarterly to isolating the most important things on a monthly to breaking down what is it exactly that we're doing on a weekly to execute against those monthlies. That same process can be applied to anyone on either a personal or a company basis. And I hope that's a simple enough framework to use for your own companies as well. Now to give some, the most important thing for that quarter is just determining what's number one. That's, if you've walked away after a quarterly session and said, this is the most important thing for this quarter, you've done good. That said, other things that you might want to focus on a quarterly basis, budget, always important. Personnel moves and needs, and then strategic moves and needs. If your company's working on the wrong thing or you have the wrong people working in the company, those are absolutely the kind of things to evaluate on a quarterly basis and correct. On a monthly basis, again, the most important thing is just what's number one for the month. So we kind of went through quarterly goals and what might have been most important, and then actually isolated, well, in the context of a month's timeline, this is what's most important. Secondarily, you still want to make sure to focus on budget and keep that in check and know what your budgets are being set to and what budgets are actually being used. And monthly is a good time, especially with part-timers, to kind of reevaluate resources. Do you have the right people? So I use resources instead of personnel in this context because I find personnel to be more like founders, team members, full-timers, and resources to be more like agencies you're working with, freelancers you might be working with, others. And the other thing on a monthly basis that's really important is specs. I didn't put them on weekly specifically because I think high-level specs are something that you don't want to keep revisiting and revisiting. You kind of want to make sure that they're clear enough for an extended enough period of time that people can actually work against them for several weeks. So that was the only reason why I included them in monthly instead of weekly. And then finally for weekly, if you haven't guessed yet, there's first off is what's number one for the week. You absolutely want to check on a budget. And in the context of a week, that might mean hours with freelancers, or that might mean just your own payroll if you're working with full-timers. And then the most important thing on a team management basis for the week is anyone blocked and is anyone unclear? Unclear those two are usually going to go pretty clear together. If someone's blocked, they might communicate in the way of I'm not sure on something or I don't have something. And if someone's unclear, that they might not literally say I'm unclear on this. It might look like they're communicating or working on the wrong thing. That would usually be a leading indicator for someone being unclear on a specific task. And then there's the tough stuff, like the unplanned, the unexpected, the EQ stuff. And I want to make sure that we bring up a few of these examples. So there's a bunch of tough conversations that are going to happen sporadically. You can't plan for these. You can evaluate them on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis, but they're more likely to hit you out of left field, except for this last one here, and we'll go into that in a second. So underperforming, whether it's a freelancer, whether it's a team member, whether it's a co-founder, that's one of the toughest conversations that you can have, because you don't want to attack someone's psyche, but at the same time, you need to do what's best for your company. Misalignment, which I think is a little easier than something like underperforming, because if someone just has the wrong goals, that's okay. That doesn't kind of eat at them personally. If someone has to be told that they're not good enough at something, that usually creates a pretty negative reaction from someone. Firing is never easy, even if it's with contractors or freelancers. It's just a tough conversation to have. And then one of the toughest that we see all the time with startups is running out of money. When you run out of money, it forces you to fire your team or parts of your team, or do tough things that might cause people to leave. In any of these situations, biggest recommendations are to have those conversations as early as possible, to be as clear and honest with people as possible. At the end of the day, you're working with other people. It quite literally is looking someone in the eye and having a tough conversation. And in any of these that we've had at Turtle, or I've had at prior companies, the best results have always come out of just having an honest conversation with a person, looking them in the eye, and making sure to both be as direct as possible with them and give them the infrastructure to be as direct as possible with you. That said, there is no perfect formula for those tough conversations. That's why they're labeled as those tough conversations. It's just over time, and as you're working with more people, hope that you'll build the right EQ to have them, and to figure out how to navigate those very difficult paths later on in your career. So I also want to highlight kind of bringing this back to budgeting, dev, and design sessions in the past. What does this line item of users can send a direct message to another user really mean on a monthly basis? And what does that mean by, again, specs? Well, that's quite literally this chat conversation that we talked about in one of our first sessions. You'd want to pair users can send a direct message to another user. This might not mean much to someone just as a list item, but as soon as you bring in other concepts that we talked about, like our specs, now all of a sudden, okay, well, in the context of this existing chat, I want to be able to, this in here specifically, we're creating a new bug. I should have updated the specific item, but I think same point of make sure to pair specs with whatever those highlight level items are, especially the most important one. So in the context of this example, we're going from quarterly to isolating that users can send a direct message being the most important one. And on a weekly basis, we absolutely are going to need that spec. That alone is not going to be enough for someone to work with. I also want to tie back in this 10X rule to management, and how important it becomes for management. Management is not just specs or quarterly planning or monthly planning. It's managing people and it's managing things, just like was said in that definition, even though they use the word control, which I don't like. But keeping this idea of, at each stage of the way, the costs, whether they're in time or whether they're in dollars, are going to increase 10x as you go through the different phases of idea to design to code. This is an absolutely critical piece to keep in mind as you're planning your weeks, your quarters, and your months in between. If you know that you're having 100 hours in development budget and 10 hours in design budget, it gives you a very simple framework to think about design versus code and how you can fit those in. And the same math can be done with a dollar figure as well, not an hours figure, as long as you know either your salaries, your rates in between. And we talked about those dollars to hours conversions in prior sessions. I think the skateboarding thing really matters here as well, not just with specs, but in how we plan. If we set our quarterly goals to be steps 1, 2, and 3, and on a monthly basis, we said step 1 was most important, and at the end of that month, we learned something based on step 1, we absolutely should reevaluate what that quarter should look like. Just because we planned that quarter a month ago, a month later, we now have more information. So in the same concept of skateboarding, that same theory applies to quarterly, monthly, and weekly planning. As you get further along the horizon and as you get more information, you should use that to your advantage to replan that next horizon. And finally, there's management across every section of this triangle. So design management is different than dev management. Dollar management is different than people management. They all have their own nuances, and you can go pretty deep into each one of these. But I just want to highlight that we went through a very high level view of monthly, weekly, and quarterly planning in context of tech startups and in what you're all working on. But each one of these corners of the triangle have their own very specific levels of management. And hey, Pranav, we're just getting into the guest session. How are you? We're just wrapping up. And then finally, resources that you might want to take away before we jump into our guest session. So GitLab's handbook, GitLab CEO will be speaking with us end of next week as our guest. And I think their handbook is awesome in the sense that they just run their company like a totally just open source business, in the sense that they open source all their processes as well. So it's I think it's like 3,000 pages if you print it out, but it's organized pretty nicely online, where they just show this is exactly how we run our business with 700 remote employees. So you can go pretty deep into exactly how they handle design management, dev management, finances, personnel issues, et cetera. Scaling Up and High Growth Handbook are both great reads that are somewhat lengthy. The 1 Minute Manager, super short and easy, one of my favorites. Anything by Peter Drucker, even though I called one out specifically. This is linked in here as well, and you'll get the PDFs at the end of the session. 2 YC Startup School videos that I pulled out, Analytics for Startups and Setting KPIs and Goals. I think KPIs, goals, and analytics are critical parts of management. We didn't get a chance to go through it today. And then I believe I've linked this in a prior session, but Fixed Skateboard Management, where it kind of combines the concepts of skateboarding, fixed budget, fixed timeline, and fixed cost, and puts them into one kind of couple-page concept that's pretty easy to follow. You'll get this in PDFs after the session. I want to make sure that we don't hold up our guests, though. So we're going to have 2 extremes of guests today. We're going to have Pranav. Hey, Pranav.
Hey, guys.
So he is the CEO of Glyph. Actually, do you want to do a quick intro so I don't botch this?
Yeah, sure. So Glyph is a digitally knit shoe company. So it's an e-commerce business. We make shoes with digital knitting technology that are meant to be the only pair of shoes someone needs to own, either for their day, for their trip, for their weekend, for their life. And we're part of 500 startups and also backed by Cornell University and some cool angel investors who are cool in that they don't bother me ever.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. If he joins us, I also have Roman, who's kind of the polar opposite in the sense of management. Not polar opposite from you, but I wanted to make sure that in a management specific session, we have guests from 2 extremes. So Pranav is running a startup. It's when I first met with you, you had just gotten to SF and you were raising us around, and it was before 500 startups, and it was just you and your co-founder. So you're absolutely working within that early startup chaos of management is doing what's most important today. Versus Roman is a co-pilot at Turtle that gets to work with a bunch of startups through Turtle and runs a more traditional management operation and can answer some more of the tactical questions. So he's not here yet. I think he'll join us probably in the next few minutes here, but I wanted to make sure that both are here as guests to answer any questions. So we're going to skip over Roman until he joins us, and we're going to focus on Glyph now. So I pulled this from your website, Pranav. First question is, did you guys make these the bear heads?
Yeah, the Panda Mask. There's like a site that you can print out like the scheme to do it. I actually just had a TaskRabbit do it because I'm terrible at arts and crafts. But yeah.
Nice. Okay. And you were giving your summary before it. So you've raised from angels so far. You're in 500 startups, and you're also backed by Cornell Tech.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. So we just went through a management session. Just so that you get context of who's here. Nick, Ingrid, Stephanie, do you want to maybe give a quick intro to, we have a smaller group today, so just maybe spend like 30 seconds each so that Pranav knows who you are. Nick, you wanna take it away?
Sure. Hey, Pranav, I'm Nick. I am one of the two co-creators of Eriously. So our software takes any digital text and turns it into audio, and then folks listen to it on their phones or laptops. So our two biggest customers are students who turn their reading assignments into listening assignments, and commuters who listen to news and articles to and from work.
Cool.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll go next. Hi, Pranav. My name is Stephanie. I'm one of the founders of Bonmo. Before I go into what we're doing, studies have shown that humor is the #1 most effective ad message type. But getting humor right in marketing is really hard. And so what we're doing is we're taking the guesswork out of using humor in marketing, like the way that Dollar Shave Clubs really broke out with their brand on YouTube. And so what we're building is a platform that connects brands and agencies with professional comedians from a diverse range, and match the right comedian to any given campaign based on their product, audience, industry, to make sure that whichever comedian works for them and helps them develop that marketing content speaks directly and authentically to their target audience.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, I don't know if you can see me. I'm Ingrid. You can see me? Okay, great. Hi, I'm the founder of Smile Lounge. I'm an ex-orthodontist, and I'm starting Smile Lounge, which is consumerized clear aligner orthodontic treatment, or moving your teeth using plastic. So there's all these direct-to-consumer options on the market that try to make it cheaper for customers, and it's a great user experience, great price point, but the quality isn't there. So I'm essentially creating the option that customers want by giving customers quality, by dematerializing the orthodontic experience at the price point they want, and the affordability and the convenience they want.
Got it. Is that like braces?
Pardon?
Is that like braces?
Yeah, clear liners. So moving your teeth using plastic instead of braces.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think one of the most exciting things about Pranav being here is that the core of his product is actually not software. Most of the other speakers we've had and most of the sessions that we've had have been around building UIs, software, planning it. So I think this is a breath of fresh air to talk about a physical product, the management, and the journey that Pranav and his team have taken to get here. So to kick things off, Pranav, how much software is involved in what you're doing, or how much do you consider this to be a company?
So there's a lot of development. Well, there's two parts, right? One is there's the shopper is digitally knit, and so that there is some software component to that, but we work with a manufacturing partner on that. And so like we use their developers, and we're kind of on the ground in China, just like sort of giving them feedback on the product. And then in terms of the site, we use Shopify, and we do like, we basically take templates and customize them. So we do use developers for that, but Shopify developers are like really cheap. Like I think they're like, and like Shopify development, from what my understanding is, like some of the easiest development out there. So it hasn't really been too much of an issue for us, relative to what other companies are doing, just because if you're like in Shopify, it's not too big of a deal.
Yeah. And then we spent today covering management specifically in the context of early stage startups, which is everything from managing oneself and separating kind of deep work and shallow work to managing a small team of freelancers and full-timers. Can you talk a bit about, on a weekly, monthly, or perhaps quarterly basis, what your management and goal setting process is like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So switching contractors to actually, like, we work with a lot of contractors at any given time. Like right now it's a designer, for the new site, a web developer for the new site, 2 shoe designers, photographer, I think a few others. So it actually is hard because you are context switching a lot. I think I think a lot of it is just to find good people to work with. That's like the hope. And because if you find good developers or designers, what we found is that like you just don't have to worry about things too much, and that like they just know what to do, and you're giving them less granular feedback, because giving granular feedback takes a ton of time. And so you're hoping to find people that can just do it without you. But the reality is that most of the contractors are, and I think that's what, that's why Vlad said is cool, because most of the people you find are just bad. Like our hit rate for hiring contractors, my hit rate for hiring contractors is like maybe at 60%. I found a good person. And when I find a good person, I'm just super nice to them. And I'm like, I just like tell them how much we appreciate them and stuff, because I just want to keep them. I just don't want to have to find somebody else, because finding somebody is really hard. Like we spend a lot of time in finding them. So that'd be my advice is like, find good people. Also, if you can get referrals from people that have done the exact same thing, where they've done the exact same thing, because like contractors are not going to like get super up to speed and change their stuff. For example, if you're getting a designer, just find a designer that's designed exactly the kind of site you want, right? Because it's not like a long-term relationship that they don't work for you full time. So I'd just be wary of getting people that have done like the exact thing that you're trying to do. Those would be my main points of advice.
Makes total sense. And then I've got two more questions for you before we open it up to the audience. And by the way, if there's anything that you want to speak like super freely on and you want me to go off the record for any reason, just let me know and I'll like totally stop the recording, or afterwards we can cut it out. So I'd rather intimate, open, etc. with the participants.
Yeah.
So
I'm probably not savvy enough to know what to filter. I think you're fine.
Okay. Well, if anything does come up, just know that's an option.
Okay.
Can you tell us a bit about your 500 startups journey? I know that there are people on this call and just other startups that might be watching this where an accelerator like 500 startups would be critical to their journey. So can you talk a little bit about getting in, being in it? Where are you in that step of the journey? So.
Yeah. For us, it's been amazing. So for a few reasons, but there's been a lot of good things. The main things are that the way it works is you get assigned 2 mentors in a program that work or one will work for 500, one may or may not, and you meet with them once a week. So one of them's an investment lead and one's a growth lead. So they've both been really useful. But for us, like when we'd kind of been selling like through organic channels, like through word of mouth. Like we didn't have a big budget before. So we got in here, we really didn't know how to sell online. And since we've been in the program, we've had a growth mentor and she's been amazing. And I just got off our last meeting with her and we were like, hey, can we just like keep doing this even though the program's ending? And she said, yes. So we were excited. So that's been huge for us because we wanted to scale our company online. And I just didn't have that experience before. So that was the main thing.
Because one of the things I've noticed most, and I get retargeted some of your ads either from visiting your website or being connected to you, but I think you have great advertisement. So is that something that you think you've learned while you've been in 500 startups, or is that something that you and your co-founder came to the table with early on?
I think so I write the copy and all of that, but it's more a function of how we're targeting, like how we segment customers and like drive them to landing pages. Some of it's probably kind of basic. I just hadn't done it before. And then but we asked her about every little phase of it. Like, is this copy good? Are we segmenting? Because really it's like you're running lots of experiments. It's like, how do you think about running experiments at a high level? I think with these mentors, they really are going to give you this these high level frameworks, and then you have to go in and do the grunt work and execute.
Yeah.
But that's like I'm okay with that. Like I'm fine. I just need to know what to do, So So that's been good. There's a lot of credibility from investors. Like we had investors that just like kind of blew us off, and then we got into 500 and they wanted to talk to us.
Got it.
That was part of it. And now we're getting to the end, and we just had there's demo day, but we just had preview day yesterday, which is all the companies pitch, and they're like, but now it's become, and that used to be just a practice day, but it's evolved into this thing where investors like come to that too, because it's like you get in a week early or whatever. And so that we had like a prep for the preview day, and there's like the companies that are try and use it as a way to get investors in the round and create FOMO. They use these demo days, and you'll see that YC does this really well too. So that's been a big part of it. And then also just meeting a lot of founders. We were surprised. It's been super useful, and they have a lot of experience and are really great companies. So, and a lot of them are older. I'm 30, and I was kind of on the younger end, and I was kind of surprised by that. But it's been great because we've been meeting a lot of people that really know what they're doing and learning from them and building relationships with them. So it's just like good energy, because doing startups, it's just kind of lonely a lot of the time. And my co-founder's in China a lot, so just being around people that are actually legit and are doing a good job and care about you is really nice. It's been nice.
The age thing is surprising me because I always kind of assumed that, YC and 500 startups is a bunch of 16-year-olds with billion-dollar companies.
YC skews younger, I think. And also YC is like, you don't go into the office every day. So YC, you come to California, but then you work out of wherever, and then you meet like once a week. 500 is like you're at the office every day.
Oh, okay. So you're actually at the office. Yeah. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So YC is 200 companies this batch. So it's like huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a guy, Keon from Cornell Tech, that went through it. He could probably talk. I've talked to him a lot. So a lot of what I know about YC is through him.
Oh,
you should
cool.
definitely bring him in.
Yeah. I'd love to have him as a guest.
Yeah.
And then 500, they get you everyone together in an office every day, basically.
Yeah, so I'm in that right now. Like, it's just the 500 staff sits on one side, all the companies sit on one side, and then there's some space. If you want to stay over, you can pay them like you would pay a WeWork. If you like, we'll probably do that for a few months.
Got it. And then last question before we open it up to others. We spent a lot of time today on weekly, monthly, quarterly planning, and kind of ignored the North Star mission statement of the companies here and how to plan them. That said, we used SpaceX as an example as great management in the sense that Elon has gotten 6,000 people corralled together on this idea of people living on other planets, and everything kind of leads up to that. Everything they do every day, every week, every month. Where do you see Glyph in 5 years?
For us, it's just we have this mission of, my favorite part about it is telling people like, hey, you can own fewer things, and people that own fewer things tend to be better dressed, tend to have a much more positive impact on the environment. So for us, it's just about designing really cool products that replace a lot of other products and that people love and they wear a lot of the time. So it's just like scaling the company up in that way. In the e-commerce space, we've seen companies like Native Deodorant. So like they sold for $100 million and only had 7 employees when they did that. And so we actually I would like to not scale from a headcount perspective as much as other companies might, but I would like to scale our mission up. That's kind of how I think about it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've seen, I think there's a very healthy trend in smaller teams emerging across startups.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I'll say is, like, to be frank, is like a lot of these startups are, especially these like big SaaS enterprise startups, which are awesome, but it's just like, they're going to be like big or not. Like there's not a lot of, like, they're in these markets where there's going to be 2 winners or whatever. For us, it's different. Like, we could be like, even if we were like a $10 million business, that would be life-changing to my co-founder and I, right? And we still want to shoot for something really big, but I don't take on financing in a way where if we became like a $5 million business, it would be a failure. If we became like a $20 million business, it would be a failure. And there were a generation of e-commerce businesses in New York City that were like Glyph, Fab, Bonobos, Blue Apron, that all took this approach, and things ended very poorly for all of them. So we were just very wary of that going into it.
Yeah. All right. So Ingrid, Stephanie, Nick, I want to make sure that you get a chance to ask Pranav any questions too. And specifically, I have not been able to cover anything on accelerators or fundraising because that's not where I have any experience. So he would be great to ask any of those specific questions or anything in the kind of physical products related world, or have fun with it. Ask anything. If you don't have questions, I do have some probably more boring ones than yours lined up, but I'd much rather you guys get some questions in too. Nick, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I've never really made anything physical outside of like greeting cards, let's say. So I'm really curious how, you just mentioned an interest in building more products past, the shoes that you're selling today. And I'm curious, how do you think about like what's next in terms of something physical? Because, it's so much more capital intensive than, stuff that we're doing, for example.
Yeah, the hard part about, that's a good question. The hard part about physical is that your feedback loop is so fucking slow relative to software, right? Like you might have to like get the partnerships, or like manufacture it, get feedback, like all this stuff. So you need to be sure before you start. And like we spent over 100 hours doing customer interviews and talking, and like I was actively trying to get people to tell us that our idea was shitty shit. Like a lot of founders will ask like leading questions, like, don't you think it would be great if you could do this, right? Or don't you think it would be great if you could do this? And I would be like, would you even want this? Like, I was like super like trying to get negative answers and like disprove it. So I would do that. And then like if you can fake it in any way, like you can run. And now that I know more about growth hacking, I definitely would do more in terms of like trying to like, you could have a fake landing page and see if it converts. You could like drive people to checkout and like have them think they're about to pay and be like, oh, never mind, we're sold out or whatever, right? So you could really validate stuff before you put in the effort, because making stuff is hard, man. And like, especially what we did was we made a product that you really can't buy, and that's super hard. Like if you make like sell sheets, right? You go to a factory that makes sheets. It's still pretty hard because you got to figure out how to get into them and deal with it. But making something that factories don't make, you have to put the whole supply chain together. It was like way harder than we thought it was going to be. So I would just keep that in mind when you're thinking about it. But yeah, physical products are really cool. It's very rewarding. I like it. What we've done a lot, and now that we kind of have our manufacturing set up, it feels good. But it was just incredibly painful and depressing to get. Like we were just on the ground in China for like 8 months in factory towns. I mean, it was terrible. Like not the good parts of China, not like Shanghai, like towns that you've never been to or will ever go to for like a long period of time. Like that's how we did it.
Wow.
Are you able to share what you're working on next?
What we're gonna do, like, so right now we just need to have way more colors and way more designs around the silhouette that we have. So that's like the next few years for us. We're just gonna sell like the hell out of this one shoe and have lots of colors. Maybe we'll do like a point and like whatever. But that's the next few years for us, for sure. Yeah.
Congrats.
Hi, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ingrid.
So do you have any good resources on growth hacking?
That's a good. Yeah, there's one guy. Yes, like let me just look it up. There's a ton of Brad resources on growth hacking.
You said bad resources?
There's a ton of bad resources. That's why I'm trying to find. There's one guy, I think his name's like Neil Patel, has a site that is good. Yeah, neilpatel.com is the site that a lot of people use.
And then maybe to dig into the resources a bit a little more, whether it's growth hacking or growth marketing or whatever label we put on it, a couple of strategies that just had like unfair ROI in your sense, meaning, you put effort into them and you just did not expect the results to be as good as they were.
Yeah, for us, it's like a lot of the common sense stuff about who your customers work. So for us, like we target when we so I'll tell you our story actually about growth. So we came into the program and they were like, oh, maybe you should use an agency for Facebook, which is our main channel. So we used an agency and it was fucking terrible. They took a week to get set up, which was ridiculous. Then they spent over 3 weeks, they spent $1,000 and got one sale. And they were just like, your site sucks. Your site doesn't convert, whatever. And I was, they weren't running any experiments. Didn't make sense. So I took it over. And after I had spent 3 weeks, we had CAC down to $27. We did over $2,500, and we were doing over $2,500 in revenue per day before we sold out, and we were doing it profitably. I still want to email that guy and be like, you're a fucking idiot. I haven't done that yet because I'm doing stuff.
What do you think was the main? Was it just that you had intel to the customer that the agency couldn't, or was it skill?
Yeah. I understand the customer better than them, and I'm running experiments every day. Their approach was like, oh, we're going to run experiments like once a week, meaning like you have these ad sets and they pick who your target. And it's this fucking bull. They're like, oh, you need to let Facebook learn, so it takes a week. It's all fucking bullshit. They're just lazy, and the economics don't make sense because your spend's not high enough.
Yeah.
But I will probably never. And we've done our branding ourselves. I never want to use an agency for anything ever. I don't believe
later stage it might make sense for companies, but we talked about it a lot with designers and engineers, and for startups, agencies make less and less sense too. It's you throw the wall, you pay a lot of money, and typically the people doing it, the margins don't make sense, and they're just not going to be as invested or deep enough into the problem as the founders will be. Yeah, the team will be.
That's right. There's a well-known sentiment in B2B, which is that you can't hire salespeople to figure out how to do sales. You have to figure it out yourself, and then you can pass that on. I think that's true for B2C, and the way it works is, Vlad, you're probably right, is like you have to figure out the channel. You figure out the channel yourself, like become an expert in it, and then you can pass it on to like somebody internally or an agency. But if your whole business depends on this channel, like you have to be the one to figure it out. The other hack is like, not a hack, but you need to find people that have done exactly what you're doing. So because I had never been able to find people that were really good at growth hacking and cared about us enough to spend time with us before we got into 500. And then there was 2 founders I reached out to when we got in, and they both spent a lot of time with me. And one woman, she has this startup called Mama. She had scaled her company through Facebook like 3 months ago, right? Because if it's something that's like 3 years ago, their advice isn't relevant anymore. So it's like she had just done what we're trying to do, and I would try and find that person, because a lot of people will give you advice on Facebook advertising, but they don't know what they're talking about. And like, there are just so many people that give bad advice. You just have to find people that have done exactly what you're trying to do recently.
Yeah. I think the research is huge there. A lot of people will have the right intentions, but if it's from a couple of years ago, the game has just changed.
Yeah, sometimes they have the right intentions. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
So just to summarize, for you, it was really about figuring out exactly who your customer is and then targeting them. And then once you figured it out, you were able to kind of pass that off to someone else.
I still haven't passed it off. We sold out. I'm not, and I want to find more segments, so I'm not going to pass it off. And but yeah, for us, like we just do well with minimalists. So like one of the first experiments I run, like we started targeting people that like Marie Kondo. And then we ran an ad that was like, what if you only had 1 pair of shoes? It's like not rocket science. I don't know like what the agency was doing for 3 weeks. And so yeah, that it just worked. But I ran a lot of those, and I would at first figure out your segments in Facebook. First figure out like, have an ad that's decent, right? And that matches your audience. So what you want to do is you want to have like a thesis, and that thesis should include an advertisement, a segment, and a landing page. So for us, there's all these different theses. Like it could be like vegans because they're choosing like no animal. It could be minimalists. It could have been, people that wanted 1 shoe all day. Like we call them kind of like hustlers. It could have been all these, like it could have been just early adopters because it's a new product. So I had ads that like talked about that each one. Then I had a landing page. Then I had a segment. So I was like targeting, like for example, the one that worked, right? It was like, I had an ad, what if you only had 1 pair of shoe? We're targeting minimalists because we're targeting people that like Marie Kondo. That drives them to a specific landing page that's all about having 1 pair of shoes. And I did that for 7 different segments, and I ran all of them, and I saw like what worked best. And then I was like, oh, this one's kind of performing. And then I started trying to optimize the ad. And like for a long time, and even now, our ad's like okay. But it's just like that arc makes sense. And then you like start optimizing, like you tweak the copy, you make the ad higher production value and stuff like that. The other thing with Facebook is you can Google Facebook ad library. And this is a site Facebook has, and you can search a company and see what their ads are. So for us, if I just want to quickly figure out like what's a really good shoe ad, I can just like look at what Allbirds ads are really quickly and easily. And I'd encourage you guys to do that and just see like what ads your competitors are running, and that your baseline should be like copying them. And then once you figure out more creative stuff, you can do that. But when you're just trying to figure out, does my messaging ad, landing page arc work, you should just copy their best ads. And I didn't even do that, honestly, because I didn't have enough time, but I would do it that way.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's something that everyone here hopefully will have the burden of dealing with as they're in growth stages for their companies.
Yeah.
We've got just a few minutes here. Stephanie, if you had a question, I want to let you jump in. If not, I have one specific one.
I'm okay. Thank you.
Great. So I want to ask Pranav, what's your management and tool stack like? There's a lot of tools that are out there today, and we didn't spend much time talking about them today. We focused mostly on process, but between Notion and Slack and Asana, what is your day-to-day tool set like? And if you could start, I know you said that your co-founders in China, but just to give the context of team size, distribution, because it obviously always adjusts depending on how the setup is.
Yeah, we use 2. So we use Asana for our team, and like kind of live off of that for long-term planning. And then for communication, we're on Slack because we're part of the 500 community, but we communicate through WhatsApp or WeChat, depending where he is. So we're pretty flexible with tools, I would say, but internally we have specific tools. And then it depends, because sometimes like we're communicating, and I'll use Uber Conference a lot for us, because Uber Conference people can dial in from anywhere in the world, and either through phone or through like whatever digital voice. So I think it works easily because we're like always in random places and stuff like that. But you know, you'll have to adapt depending. So if we have a contractor or like an advisor that wants to use something or see things in a certain way, we just kind of make it happen if they're really good. So a lot of times, like, we just work around that. And then if not, we try and put people onto our own tools. And the other thing I'd say is, like, again, just like if you have people like that, it's hard to, like, it takes a long time to source tools, and a quick way around it is just like, so for example, we just have to source an email marketing tool because we've been using MailChimp, and MailChimp is terrible. And so we just I just like didn't have time, but we needed to figure it out. So I just reached out to like 4 direct consumer founders, you know, 2 were from 500, 2 weren't, and they were all using the same one. So it's like, all right, done. I'm not going to spend any more time on this.
Yeah. What was it?
I don't even remember. It's called, like, it's got some stupid name. Realology or something.
I feel like every single person here is at some point gonna have to deal with that same email marketing challenge.
Yeah, and so ours was specific. I know that SendGrid is the one of choice generally these days, but if you're on Shopify, the one we use is like specific to Shopify. It starts, God, I can't remember the name. It starts with actually, okay. Here's a better tip though. Here's a better high level tip. There's a Google Chrome add-on called Built With. And what it does is you go on a site, you see what they're using. So you see if they're using Shopify or not. You see what they're using for email marketing. You see everything. And so, like, if you just go to a couple sites where, like, yeah, these guys probably know what you're doing, just use Built With. And you only need the free version. There's like a premium version. I don't think you need it. Oh yeah, okay. And now, so I'm going on Baboon to the Moon. It's a great brand. And I'm seeing it's called Klaviyo. That's what we use for email. It's called Klaviyo. That's what we're going to implement now.
Got it.
Yeah, so just steal other people's tools that you think have put effort into sourcing them, because it's just a lot faster.
Because they've already done the thought process behind all this.
Yeah.
Got it. And then Stephanie commented that she highly recommends Klaviyo. So.
Oh, cool. There you go. Yeah.
Awesome. And then we just hit up until 10 o'clock Pacific here. But I did want to ask just last thing, number one lesson learned in your journey so far. And ideally something that surprised you, something that, you know.
Well, I'll give you like a shitty thing to hear, which is like the main difference between the startups succeed and don't is whether like you keep going or not. But then there are people that keep going when they shouldn't. So you have to figure that out for yourself, and no one is going to give you good advice on that. And like, one thing I found is like, so we raise money, and like, I don't give a shit what investors think about our business, and like, it doesn't affect how I think about our business, whether it's a good idea or not. That like, when we first started doing startups, like, oh, like investors will know what's a good business or what's not a good business. They have like no fucking idea, and and even the good ones know that they don't know. And the way that they look at deals is like, who are the founding team? Does this company have traction or not? Like, is this a hot space? Who are the other investors? And they're cognizant of the fact they have no fucking idea what a good business is, right? Because none of those things are really addressing that. So you're the only one that will know that. And if you feel like you got it going on, then like the only difference between making it and not making it is if you keep going. But also doing startups really sucks. Like, it's just super depressing and lonely and like shitty. So I don't know. You got to have a good reason if you're going to do that. Like, it's fucking terrible. Like, I can't believe that there are people that like sit in front of like they're on a panel in a room full of people, and they're like, you should all do a startup. Like, sometimes I'm meeting some asshole, and I'm just like, God, I hope this guy tries to start a company just so he'll feel the fucking pain. Like, it's not something I'd wish on anybody that I liked.
I think those are great motivational words to Pranav, thank you so much for joining us, for being, you know, so direct with everyone about your experience. I found it super helpful, and I hope that everyone else did as well. We'll be sending you some speaker only turtle swag once that's out of production, and
awesome.
You'll like it. But thank you so much for joining us, Pranav. I really appreciate it.
For sure. And like, Vlad has my contact info. Feel free to reach out if I can be useful. Thanks for having me, guys.
I'll send out your email and your LinkedIn if people want to reach out. Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of 500. And we'll be watching to see where Glyph goes. For everyone else, I'm just going to screen share again for a second. So just thanks, Pranav.